GPU pricing is effed up once again, but exactly how effed up is it? That's what I want to find out today. I want to put some numbers to this whole situation. How much have graphics card prices increased since memory prices have gone through the roof? Are certain cards being affected more than others? And is this widespread across different regions? How much are the AI companies and PC part vendors screwing over regular gamers that built these companies to begin with? There's some pretty interesting data to go through today, including stuff that will help us to confirm or refute various supply rumors that we've been hearing across the last few months. If you're interested in the dynamics of what is going on with PC gaming and component prices, this is very much the video for you. It's a very comprehensive look into the current state of things. But before we get into it,
today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Insta360 and their brand new Link 2 Pro series, designed for high-end business users and professional creators, allowing for multi-person meetings, online education, live streaming, and content creation. Packing a new 1 1/3 inch sensor for brighter, clearer, and more detailed 4K video across all lighting environments, along with dual mics supporting AI noise cancelling. And of course, you're still getting all of Insta360's standard AI features, such as tracking and auto framing, but there's also the new AI tracking area feature that allows you to set a tracking zone, and once you step outside of that zone, the camera stops following, preventing unwanted camera movement and avoiding accidental tracking into private areas. Other new features include green screen and scene presets. The Link 2 delivers more accurate edge detection and smoother blending, producing a studio-grade chroma key effect when using the green screen, while scene presets have been dramatically expanded, allowing you to save preferred camera angles, visual effects, image settings, AI models, and virtual backgrounds. All of this can be had for $250 US, including a mini tripod for the first 20 orders, so check the link in the video description.
So there's two sets of data that we're looking at today. The pricing information that we captured back in November 2025 when GPU prices were at their lowest, and an updated set of data for February 2026. This data encompasses 10 regions around the globe, and it's specifically looking at the lowest price for available in-stock models. I used price comparison websites tailored to each region to find the best price at the time, so there are many retailers included here. It should be an accurate look at how much it costs, at minimum, to purchase a given GPU in each country. Here's the situation for Nvidia's entry-level models, the GeForce RTX 5050 and RTX 5060. Now, back in November, these models were available at or close to the MSRP, so everything was normal. In early 2026, the RTX 5050 has gone up in price by 9% on average across these 10 regions. The price impact isn't very significant in the US, where the 5050 is just $10 more expensive than it was, and in Brazil it's actually gotten cheaper. But in other regions like Germany, Poland, and India, the 5050 is now quite a bit more expensive than it was, and that's the cheapest GeForce model. The RTX 5060 has been affected to a greater extent. This card is more expensive in every region, with the lowest impact seen in the United States, where the model is available at the MSRP. On average, though, the 5060 is now 13% more expensive after 3 months, with 7 regions seeing a double-digit increase. Normalized to US dollars, this is the equivalent of a $40 price increase. Though to be fair, in a lot of regions, the 5060 was slightly below MSRP back in November, so this is somewhat of a correction plus a bit more on top. Next up, we have the RTX 5060 Ti series available in an 8GB and 16GB model. It shouldn't be a surprise that the 16GB model has seen more substantial price increases in most regions. In fact, only in the Philippines and Canada did the 8GB model go up by more than the 16GB model. On average, the 8GB variant is 11% more expensive after 3 months, while the 16GB card is now 21% more expensive. The price hikes are especially bad in India, where the 16GB model is now 46% more expensive, and in the Netherlands we saw an increase of 36%. The price increase for the 5060 Ti 8GB isn't too crazy. It's gone up by about $40 US on average across the regions. The 5060 Ti 16GB has gone up by $80 US, which at first glance makes sense because the 16GB model has twice the amount of VRAM, so you'd expect the price increase to be twice as much as the 8GB card. However, there's a lot of variance in this overall average. There are regions like Australia where there seems to be a lot of existing 5060 Ti stock, so the cheapest models haven't gone up by that much in 3 months. Then there are other regions like the US, where the 8GB card has barely increased in price, while the 16GB card has gone up by $100 US. Regions where more supply was brought in before the price hikes have survived a bit better, so it'll be interesting to see how this changes in the coming months. The RTX 5070 has seen a relatively straightforward 14% price increase on average since November. In the case of the US, the 5070 was actually retailing for below MSRP back then. Those days are over, but it's still possible to get one at the MSRP, which is a 15% price increase, but not as drastic as it could be. It's a different story in Canada, for example, where a 17% price increase has pushed this model above MSRP. Basically, buyers are looking at spending the equivalent of $70 US more on a 5070 now compared to late last year. The card with the second highest price increase on the entire market after the RTX 5090 is, of course, the 5070 Ti. This GPU is a whopping 25% more expensive now than in November, with the lowest increase being 16% and the highest being nearly 40%. In every region, this card is now well above MSRP, with an average equivalent price increase of $190 US. Given that entry-level 8GB cards have only gone up by about $40 and the 5070 12GB has only gone up by about $70, the price increase we are seeing on the 5070 Ti is clearly down to more than just VRAM cost. As we reported last month, Nvidia are heavily scaling back RTX 5070 Ti production to the point of being effectively killed off. Retailers tell us the prices you're seeing today are based on dwindling quantities of cards supplied a few months ago and extremely limited resupplies since then. As the cheapest already procured models sell out over time, the only available cards that remain get more and more expensive. We've been told pricing for this model is only going to get worse. But hey, things are even worse, if that's possible, in the high end of the market. RTX 5080 and 5090 pricing is absolutely disgusting right now, and that's despite the RTX 5080's continued production. We're being told that supply for the 5080 hasn't been throttled to the same extent as the 5070 Ti, yet in real-world prices, this GPU is also 25% more expensive now than it was in November. This has converted RTX 5080s from a $1,000 MSRP option into something more like $1,250 on average across the regions. The RTX 5090 is barely worth talking about. It's 32% more expensive in February than November of last year, and this is despite it starting at a baseline above MSRP. Basically, supply for this model is terrible, and you'll have to spend $800 US more on average now than 3 months ago. In total, 5090s are priced 65% above the global MSRP, and you're kidding yourself if you think that's entirely due to the card having 32GB of GDDR7 memory. That amount of chips hasn't suddenly gotten $1,300 more expensive in the space of a few months, while the 5070 with 12GB of G7 has only gone up by $70. Nvidia just aren't interested in making the 5090 a viable flagship gaming GPU. It really shouldn't be classified as one anymore. This is a GPU for AI professionals only. But of course, by keeping it as a GeForce gaming GPU, it helps to bump up the gaming division's revenue. I'd certainly be very interested to see those gaming division revenue numbers if the 5090 wasn't included. So that's the situation with GeForce GPUs. Across all the RTX 50 series models, we're seeing a 19% price increase on average globally in the last 3 months. In most price segments, this has bumped up the lineup by a tier. In November 2025, for $1,000, you could have purchased an RTX 5080. Today, all that gets you is a 5070 Ti. The 5060 Ti 16GB is today about as expensive as the RTX 5070 was previously in the majority of the countries that we looked at. Moving on, this is the situation with AMD's entry-level Radeon cards. The price hike we're seeing for the 8GB and 16GB models of the 9060 XT is pretty similar on average, 13% for the 8GB card and 14% for the 16GB card. This is in stark contrast to the similar RTX 5060 Ti series from Nvidia, where the 16GB card has gone up by a lot more than the 8GB model. Of course, this does vary a little from region to region. In India, for example, the 16GB card has gone up by 29% compared to 9% for the 8GB model. But then you get regions like Brazil, where the 16GB card is actually somehow cheaper now than it was previously. What appears to have happened here is that the 9060 XT 8GB was selling for a bit below its MSRP in November 2025. For example, it was $275 US versus its $300 MSRP, or 260 euros in Germany compared to a 315 euro launch price. In February, this card has returned to the MSRP and overshot it by about $30 US. Meanwhile, the 16GB card was typically at its MSRP previously, and in most regions is now more expensive by about $50. The RX 9070 series actually surprised me in terms of pricing impact across these 10 regions. Both models are now 7% more expensive than they were in November, and in only a few situations did we see more than a 10% increase. Actually, the worst price hike we saw was in the US for the 9070 XT, which is up 21% from its price 3 months ago. In Brazil, both of these models are cheaper today. For these cards, the average price impact in equivalent terms is just $40 US, which is pretty similar to the 9060 XT 16GB. As the 9070 and 9070 XT are also 16GB cards, this suggests the price increase we're seeing is largely the result of increased memory cost, which is being passed on to consumers. If the higher tier models were seeing more of a price hike than lower tier cards with the same amount of memory, I'd suggest there was some funny business at play, but that doesn't appear to be the case. It's impossible to know the exact contract price that AMD is paying for GDDR6 memory, but we can use this real-world price data for the final graphics card models to estimate the impact of recent price increases. At a $40 to $50 increase per 16GB, this suggests the VRAM cost about 50% more to acquire for cards that are on shelves today, and so are manufactured at some point in the last few months. This is assuming AMD are fully passing on the margin they make on GPU and memory bundles. If AMD were instead passing on the raw BOM cost increase, memory prices could have doubled to see the $50 impact we are currently observing. Of course, this is based on the research and modeling we did last year to break down potential GPU price increases from rising VRAM costs. Increased BOM cost is certainly one reason why Radeon cards are more expensive, but we can't rule out price gouging either. Retailers, distributors, and AIBs could have raised the price on already manufactured models just because they can. But with only a $50 impact on average for a 16GB card and knowing what we know about the cost of memory, I think what we're seeing on the Radeon side is reasonable in terms of price hike, or at the very least is more reasonable than what we're seeing from Nvidia. Across the 4 RX 9000 series cards, the average price increase is 10% across the last 3 months. The average price increase for Nvidia's directly competing models, so the 5060 Ti series, the 5070 and 5070 Ti, is 18%, so AMD is definitely in a more favorable position for now, and their cards are better relative value today than they were at the end of last year. This wouldn't be a complete look at GPU prices without also exploring Intel's Arc GPUs. Intel's models have been the least affected by price increases, especially for the Arc B570, which in half the regions I looked at is actually cheaper now than it was last year. In some cases, like in Australia, this could be because the B570 was a little overpriced previously, but on the whole, this card just doesn't seem to have gone up by all that much. The Arc B580 is a little different, with most regions seeing a price increase. This card is now 11% more expensive on average, with a couple of really bad results like a 20% hike in the US, a 25% hike in Germany, and a 35% hike in the UK. Other regions are more in the single-digit range, and this GPU is actually now cheaper in Brazil based on the data that we captured. If we look at all 14 current generation graphics cards, there's been a 15% price increase on average comparing today to 3 months ago. That's not a great position to be in, considering in November 2025, most models were only just at the MSRP, with a few GPUs sitting below it. This means in February 2026, we're now in a position where graphics cards are more expensive than the MSRP in most regions. Yes, a shocker I know given everything going on, but we do now have the data to back that up. What I have found interesting is that on the whole, graphics card prices haven't gone up by nearly as much as DRAM or SSDs. In the last 3 months, DDR5 prices have skyrocketed by 40%, and that's coming from an already inflated price. SSD prices are up over 70% in the same time frame. Right now, GPUs are 15% more expensive, and that's usually coming from MSRP-like prices, so that's some sort of small saving grace, I guess. However, the amount of increase we're seeing to GPU prices varies quite a bit, especially when we look at Nvidia's GeForce lineup. The RTX 5070 Ti is now 25% more expensive, which is the equivalent of a $190 price increase. That's a bigger price hike for this 16GB card in just 3 months than we've seen for the average 32GB kit of DDR5 6000, which according to PC Part Picker has gone up by about $120 in the same amount of time. Meanwhile, the Radeon RX 9070 XT is just $50 more expensive on average. This data seems to support recent claims that Nvidia are prioritizing specific models in the Blackwell lineup, such as the RTX 5060 Ti 8GB and RTX 5070, which are on the lower end of the scale when it comes to price hikes. Meanwhile, cards that have seen significant cuts to supply, like the 5070 Ti, are now much more expensive. It also suggests that AMD have not made similar cuts to their Radeon supply, given the average price hike for Radeon models is lower than what we saw for most GeForce cards. However, it's still early days. A lot of the GPU stock that is currently on store shelves is inventory that was purchased months ago. As those units dry up, they'll be replaced with freshly manufactured cards at a higher price, so it'll be very interesting to see where things have settled to in a few months. We're not expecting good news here from our chats with retailers, so be prepared. I haven't made any buying recommendations in this video because it's pretty hard to recommend someone rush out and buy a GPU right now when prices were much better 3 months ago. At the same time though, the prices we're showing today are probably as good as things are going to get in the short term, so if you are desperate for a GPU upgrade, and you would have to be desperate to buy right now, I wouldn't recommend waiting. So anyway, that's it for this one. As usual, we will be continuing to track GPU prices throughout the shortage period, I guess you could call it. It could be the rest of this year, could be longer than that. We have absolutely no idea, but we'll be continuing to update you on what is going on with PC component prices. So if you're interested in that, you can subscribe to Hardware Unboxed. Also consider supporting us directly if you want to. We do have Patreon, links to that is in the description. It supports independent testing and analysis, all that sort of thing, but also you get access to cool benefits, Discord community, monthly live streams, BTS content, and all sorts of other good things. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.